What I wanted to show in this presentation is what happened in the last year and what is coming in the next month, hopefully, with the new 6.5.0 release that we are working on. And just from a project perspective, it's really good to see that we have seen a really strong growth in the community in the last year. So we always look, for example, at the GitHub stars, which is not saying everything, of course, but it's always a nice measure to see popularity of projects. And we've seen some really good growth there. So we are now at 2.4K stars, which is a really good number. We did 3 6.4 releases in the last year, 6.4.0, 6.4.1, 6.4.2. And actually 6.4.1 mainly could also have been a 6.5.0 because it was actually quite packed with features and all that. But just because we didn't do any major database upgrades, we stick with a minor version upgrade. But from a feature perspective, I think we have grown a lot in the last year. Right now we are really focused on the 6.5.0 release. We actually would have hoped to already have released that a little bit sooner. But because we added some additional interesting features recently, we just wanted to wait a little bit longer before we release 6.5.0. But that should happen, let's say, in the next month, hopefully. And I think it's important to stress that for the open source project, we are really focusing on the BPMN, CMMN, and DMN engine. So those OMG standards are really the core foundation of the open source projects. And if you look at the UI applications that we also provide with the open source project, we really see them more as kind of testing applications, more like this is an example of how you could use it. With the modeler, it's a little bit different, of course, because you can just model any CMMN, BPMN, or DMN model in there. But definitely for the task application and for the admin application, it's really meant to help you to get started with Flowable. These are not really production-focused applications. And for the engines, that is the case. So we really want the BPMN, CMMN, and DMN engines to be really scalable, to be really performant, and so you can use it in your system for your purpose. If you look at what we did in the last year, we have seen a lot of CMMN improvements. So we kicked off CMMN already a year back, but in the last year we really added a lot of new cool features, and we want to also spend more time on explaining what is the benefit of CMMN in the next period of time. So what we plan to do is to write a blog series to really start from the really foundation, from the basics. What can you do with CMMN to the full complex, everything what is possible in CMMN, and definitely also the collaboration between BPMN and CMMN, because we think that it's definitely for more complex models, it's really, really interesting if you combine CMMN and BPMN together to really decompose your complex model in CMMN, in a kind of parent CMMN model and child BPMN models. So that's stuff that we want to provide some more insights on what our thoughts are with that. What we also added for that is support to listen for BPMN signal events, for example. So now you can throw a BPMN signal event in your BPMN process instance, and you can listen to that signal in a CMMN case instance. So there's some interoperation possibilities there. We also added the possibility to change the state of a running case instance, because if you have a case instance running and you want to actually move the state for some reason to another state in that case model, that's now possible. So the same like we also did for BPMN already earlier on. And there are also lots of just general CMMN improvements that we will talk about later. So what we really want to show today as one of the topics is how CMMN and BPMN can work together, and when would you choose for a CMMN model, when would you choose for a BPMN model. And Micha, he's in front here, he will give a presentation a little bit later about this topic. One of the maybe more hidden things that we added in the last year are entity links. We use them quite heavily in our Flowable Work and Engage products, but we don't really emphasize it in the open source project. But it's really an interesting concept that I wanted to show you. So it's a bit similar to identity links that we already have in Flowable for a long time. So it's really flexible. It's just linking IDs to each other, basically. But the idea is that you link parent instances to child instances, but also a child instance to a task or anything else you can think of that you want to link. And the interesting bit is that if you have a running case instance, for example, that kicks off a sub-process instance, that kicks off another sub-process instance, and that has a task as a child. So a really deep tree of instances. An entity link can really help there to provide you with an easy query capability to say, I have this parent case instance, and there are all kinds of children underneath there, and I actually want to get all the tasks for every child and also for the parent in my task list. And because you are interested in all the tasks for that case instance. And that's where entity links are really helpful for, because we store every relationship in that entity link table. So it's something that we don't enable by default. You can turn it on in the process engine configuration and in the CMMN engine configuration. But then if you turn it on, the full tree will be available for you, and you can do that kind of queries that I just mentioned. And you can also use it for any other kind of entity linking that you want to do. So if you want to link a process to a kind of document instance or to an external identifier or something, you could use the entity link to really persist that in the database. So that's already available in the current 6.4.2 release. One of the other things that we spent actually quite a bit of time on, and Philip, who is also here today, did a lot of work there, is our introduction to GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions provide you with an easy way to do automated testing, to do CI, integrated in your GitHub repository. So when you push a commit or when you create a branch, it can do all this automated testing for you. And the interesting bit is that it provides you with the ability to run it with different versions of the JDK. So definitely today, it's quite difficult for a project like Flowable to keep up with all these JDK releases and to make really sure that we support them. And GitHub Actions make that really easy because they add all these new versions of Java for us, and we just need to enable it in the GitHub Actions workflow. So now we always test against the latest early access release, against the latest stable release, and then JDK 8 and 11, I think, we also always test against. And the same for databases, and that's actually more important for us, or even more important for us, because there are so many database versions that people run on these days, also with MySQL. I think they're already on version 8 or 9 today, but there are also a lot of people still running on version 5, and GitHub Actions really make it easy to test it on all these databases. So yeah, it's really a really helpful thing that GitHub added for us. And it's also for open source projects, it's free, at least until now. I think hopefully it will also remain like that. So that's a really great thing. Some other new features. We added cockroach DB support, and that's a new database that provides a really scalable solution if you want to scale out your database really easily. So you can just run 5 instances of cockroach easily. You don't need to do a lot of sophistication for that. You can just, that's just supported. And because our persistence layer is quite flexible, we were able to integrate that without too much effort. And I think it's using the Postgres kind of database as the default, with some additional overriding of some specifics that they have implemented. What we also added is runtime activity instances. So before it was, if you were running a process instance, you always needed to go to the history tables to look up what is the path that the process has taken until now, because it was only stored in the historic activity table. But actually, if you always need to go there, that makes it slow, right? Because that data will be becoming bigger and bigger. So what we added is just a runtime table to make it more performant, because only the runtime instances are in there to also look up your activities. What's a really important feature that we added for multi-tenancy is tenant fallback. So if you are running in a multi-tenancy environment, I think this is a feature that is really helpful for you. What we do is that by default, we search for the definition. So if you have a call activity or if you invoke a DMN model, then we look for that definition first within the same deployment, and of course also within the same tenant. If it's not available there, then we search within the tenant of the running instance. And if it's not found there, then there's also a default tenant, as we call it. And that default tenant is a tenant where you can deploy all your default models to. So if, for example, you have, let's say, 100 tenants, and these 100 tenants, they have 10 models that are shared, so they all run that same process model or the same case model, but they have 2 models that are very customer specific always. Then you could deploy the 10 models to that default tenant. So you only need to deploy it once to that default tenant, and then every tenant can use that. And only for the 2 ones that are very specific, you deploy that to the specific tenant. So it makes it a lot more manageable from a model deployment perspective. And actually, if you're not running in a multi-tenant environment, then it's still true that we search first for definitions or models within the same deployment. So if you do an app deployment, then we will always search within the app scope first. And if it's not found there, only then we will fall back to searching without that parent deployment. Yes, yeah. So it's that's the case for calling DMN models, calling call activities, subcases, subprocess tasks. So also form definitions actually. So every time we search for a model, this is the logic that is implemented. Yeah, so those were some specific things I wanted to highlight for the development we did in the last year. And this is more some new developments that we have been working on. Something that we are really excited about is the event support. Last week we also presented this on DevOps, a conference in Belgium. And we will go in depth today again as well. And the starting point for this feature was that in a lot of cases you want to work with messages or events arriving on queues, arriving on Kafka, arriving on any other data source, and we always had support for that. You could listen to an event and then start a process instance, or listen to an event and trigger a process instance or something. But you always needed to write that logic yourself, or use the camel integration, for example, that we provide. And what we wanted to add is adding native support for dealing with messages and events from the core level of the engine, so that you can really define it within the engine configuration. These are the channels I want to listen to. These are the channels I want to send events or send messages to. And the only thing you configure in your process and case models is the key of the event that you want to send out. You map the variables to the payload, or the other way around. You map the event payload to variables. The real sending of the message and the receiving of the message is abstracted out of the process and case model. So you only reference the event in the process and case model, and everything else you configure outside of that. So what we have been working on is to have pluggable channels, focusing on Kafka and JMS first, to have inbound and outbound pipelines. So we have a pipeline definition for inbound messages, for outbound messages, correlation support, so that you can define when an event comes in, I want to match it based on these properties in the event to a running instance. And we added support for this eventing to the BPMN start event, boundary event, and send event task. And in CMMN also to starting a CMMN case instance, the event listener in CMMN, and also a send event task. And we will go in a lot more detail later on together with Joram and Philip, and they will show all the fine details of this feature. Another thing that we have been working on is something that we call a logging session. And the idea there is that you always have the history tables, you have the runtime tables, but still not everything is persisted. So you can really know what has happened while you were executing the process instance or case instance. It's always, you know, this was the result of my current variables, this is the result of the path that has been taken, but you don't know exactly what the process engine or case engine did. So what we wanted to add is a more fine-grained solution that gives you a really full overview of all the steps that the engine has taken to get to the point where it is. So what we added is a logging session that runs together with the command context or transaction in Flowable. And everything, well, not everything, but a lot of stuff is now logged to this logging session. So at the end of the command context, you can listen to all the events that happened on that logging session, and you can do some outputting of this logging, or you can visualize it to really make you understand what exactly has happened and in which order. Because you will see exactly now this variable has been set on the process instance, now this service task has been executed, and what is actually more interesting, it will also show you when a transaction is rolled back, because that's the most difficult one right now in Flowable to get information about. Because if we have a rollback, then nothing is persistent, of course, and the only thing where you can look at is the logging in the Flowable engine. So also in case that the transaction is rolled back, still this logging listener is invoked, and you know exactly, you can see exactly where in the process execution, in the case execution, it went wrong. I will be sharing some more details about that later this afternoon, and also show you a tool that we have been working on to visualize that as well. Because we have all these nice models that we create in the modeler. And then we can use these models to visualize where did it actually go wrong. And we can also show all the steps that have been taken in the process or case. Another thing that we have been working on is batch support. So we already did some work on process migration. Well, some work is not the correct term. We did a lot of work on process migration because it's a really difficult topic to really do that in a way that it's stable and proven. But it's still, it was a synchronous thing. So you could say, I now want to migrate this specific process instance, and then it would migrate directly for you. So the benefit there is if you only want to migrate a specific process instance, then you get some feedback directly, right? Which is nice. But if, let's say, you want to move all the instances of process definition with version 1 to a new process definition version 2, then doing that in a synchronous way is maybe not the best and easiest way to do it. So that's what really kicked us off to work on this batch support. So now you can use the exact same API like we already had for process instance migration. But now you can make a choice. I want to do it directly, I want to do it synchronous, but you can also do it in batch. And then if you do it in batch, all the instances will run in its own job. And there's some smartness happening to keep track of all the parts that you need to migrate. So you know exactly which percentage has already been completed, how many failed, and that kind of stuff. But that is another feature that is coming in 6.5, that you can use these batches to do process migration. But it has also been set up in a way that you can also use it more generically. So you could also use it for your own batch handling as well. So we did it a bit similar to our job infrastructure, that you can also just plug in any logic. And the batch stuff is also done in a generic way. Another thing, I think it was even one of the questions last year in Barcelona, is history cleanup. It was always something that we wanted to add but didn't have time to do. And the problem is your history tables, they grow big over time. If you don't do anything, then data will just be kept adding to it, of course. And maybe your requirement is only to keep that data for a month or 6 months or a year or whatever kind of period you want it to be saved on. And what is also the case, if you actually want to store that data indefinitely, you could also think of storing the full historic data in something like Elasticsearch or any other database that is able to handle large pieces of data more easily, and keep that relational historic tables as still quite lean. So what we added is query support to delete historic instances. So using the same kind of queries that you can do to get historic information, you can also use that now to delete historic instances. And we also have some automatic way to just configure how long do you want to keep your historic data. So you can say I want to keep it for 6 months, for example, and I want to run this cleanup job every night at 2 a.m. or something, or whatever time you want it to run, and then it will be done for you. So it will always look for data that is older than the configured period and just delete everything. And deleting that was not that easy because there's quite a bit of relationships in our historic data. So there's quite a bit of smart logic that deletes the data in the right order. So the last slide. So like I mentioned, what we are really working towards is a new 6.5 release with these new developments that I just shown. So that's really our core focus for now. And we want to do a couple of blog series. So one is that event architecture that we are really enthusiastic about, is to really explain what can you do with it, what are some possibilities there. So that's something we want to blog about. And definitely also about CMMN, because we really think that CMMN it can be a really interesting way of modeling your requirements in a lot of use cases. And CMMN is a lot less known than BPMN. So we want to show our experience that we have working with customers and doing the CMMN modeling also together with BPMN, and show what you can do with it. So that's something that we want to spend time on. Also improving documentation. We have been doing not a very good job at that lately. So I think we need to focus on that again, to really make sure that everything is documented well and in an understandable way. And we are always looking for community feedback for new features. So we have a lot of ideas ourselves as well, but it's always really good to hear your thoughts about what are you missing in the engines, what are some cool ideas that we could work on together. So that's the kickoff of what we did last year and what's coming. Hopefully that gives you a good overview of what is the current state of Flowable.
I just remembered, you didn't mention Kubernetes. There's some...
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
I keep forgetting all the stuff we've done.
That's actually really good, yeah. So we also recently added Kubernetes support. So we already had Docker support for quite a while, but we also added Kubernetes support. And Tim, who is with us today, will go in more detail there, also with his experience from a project, how we use Kubernetes. But I think he will also show a little bit on what is there in Flowable. So yeah. Thank you.